A terrible dragon shall come, coiling from the void below. Through deadly cold and through stone, it shall pass and yet live. Across the heavens it shall uncoil. There it shall battle the giant. Under light of blood-hued stars, it shall devour all. The Imperium of Man has endured rampages from untold monsters across the void. Crud migrations, chaos incursions, and the resurgence of soulless automatons alike, harrying its vast fiefdoms. Surviving each and every attempt by our enemies to sunder the Emperor's glory, there is one foe which in the span of less than a millennia has regardless proven exceptionally dangerous. For today, we shall elucidate the resurgence of the great devourer of the stars, a leviathan of uncompromising brutality, cunning, and remorseless hunger. The devastation of Baal. The Third Tyrannic War. Abraxas tensed as the location Taratus had indicated flashes on his slate monotron. It was less than 10 meters away. As the Vox officer had claimed, there was indeed the fading pulse of a human life sign, a blue dot winking unsteadily at the heart of a cylindrical space nearby. What Abraxas had taken at first glance for a wide chimney or maintenance duct was, on closer inspection, a chamber with its roof open to the stars. It was occupied by a dying human, and if the vague smudge around it was anything to go by, his killer to boot. The Tempestor Prime extended a hand with 3 fingers pointed towards the largest men in his squad. The trio of killers muscled to the front, dutifully flanking him as he padded down the corridor. Within moments, the circular chamber was on the other side of the graffiti-covered wall. Abraxas pulled something from under his cloak, carefully removing a long-defunct Shrieker skull from a dusk alcove in the brickwork and replacing it with a live crack grenade. He stepped back and turned away, motioning for his men to do the same. The fingers of his gauntlet counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2. On the count of 1, the crack grenade detonated with an ear-splitting bang. A moment later, Abraxas and his scions barreled into the wall with the force of a charging Ogryn. An entire sector of glass-screed wall shattered outwards. Abraxas and his men rolled with the charge, and came up in gun crouch readiness. The Tempestor Prime took in his surroundings in a single second, but the sight would stay with him to his grave. Though the Imperium of Man had endured the rampage of the great devourers of mass strength twice in their short history of conflict, its ravenous hunger wrought a heavy toll on amongst the most prestigious of its bastions. Macragge, Sofa, and other vital outposts of the Segmentum Ultima brought low by both the Behemoth and Kraken's malice. A mere 2 years following the Second Tyrannic War, Inquisitor Fidus Kryptman foresaw signs of impending doom. The Ordo Tempestus, a year prior to the Leviathan's first sighting, investigating the world of Vitria. This core world of the Ultima Segmentum rooted out so-called teleprayer signals being broadcast by multi-limbed dwellers beneath the planet's capital. Tempestor Prime Uther Abraxas of the 11th Capic Eagles, knowledgeable on the topic of early-stage Tyrannic invasion. Despite protestations from Navigator Audacious Gonst that his oversight felt agony should he peer through the Immaterium, Abraxas bludgeoned the man until he steered his vessel, the Punitive Measure, to arrive at the Vitria system. Descending to the planet's surface via the Valkyrie, Winged Persecution. Within the city of Viapolis' Maravat docks, Abraxas uncovered a Genestealer burrow under advisement of the Commissariat. Beginning the purge of the cult, the Tempestor Prime led his forces into the heart of their complex, stabbing the Broodlord through its eyes with his knife, at the cost of many of his men's lives, allowing for his moment to strike. Slaughtering the disorientated Genestealers which remained, the planet's original Lictor insurgent confronted the Stormtroopers, the covering heavy bolter fire of their Valkyrie, injuring the beast, allowing Abraxas to shatter its skull with his power mace. Investigating the Brood's lair, finding signs of etchings on its walls, a single word, Cryptus, was written again and again, a system rife with billions of souls, which the Tyranids would feast on aplenty. The Imperium losing contact with several systems within the Segmentum Tempestus a year subsequent, during 997.1041. The Astropathic Augury Network, known as the Krypton Census, forewarned of a vast pall cast throughout the southern fringe of galactic space. Entire star systems going silent, with no response to the census's inquiry. 2 tendrils of the Tyranids would be sighted light years apart in distance, regarded alike to a great maw, ready to close around all within its grasp. diverting vast swathes of the Hive Fleet to the Octaria sector in efforts to buy the Imperium time. The Greenskin Empire within gratefully welcomed the slaughter of what would be deemed by Krypton as the Leviathan. Purging the world of Griffon 4 and its surrounding worlds via Exterminatus to slow their spread, Krypton was stripped of his title of Inquisitor Lord and denounced by his kindred as a traitorous radical. Retaining loyalty with the Death Watch, Krypton ordered kill teams to capture live specimens of the Hive Fleet from the caverns of the labyrinth world of Carpathia, and despite taking heavy casualties, the Chamber militants of the Ordo Xenos planted a brood of Genestealers into the Space Hulk, Perdition's Flame, destroying the nearby moon of Geist to propel the Space Hulk towards Octarius. Once boarded by a crew of Orc looters, the Greenskins were impregnated by the Genestealers, allowing for their rapid propagation. The Overfiend of Octarius, Blacktooth, employing the services of Stormboss Saxstruck to stem the tide of the invaders. Regardless, over a dozen worlds were infested by the Leviathan, spreading to Orok, Gorala, and eventually Octarius Prime. Yet as one splinter of the tendril beset the Octarius system, another chose to commit to the Tarsus Ultra sector, a bulwark standing between the path to the Throne World itself, under the command of the Ultramarines. The defense of the planet, led by 4th Captain Uriel Ventris with support from the Mortifactus chapter of Astartes, local planetary defense forces, 10th Logris, and 933rd Death Corps of Krieg regiments of the Astra Militarum. Arriving in system during 999.M41, the world of Barbarus Prime fell in short order, Inquisitor Krypton advising the purge of the world of Cordelis, using Exterminator's warheads to slow the inevitable advance to Tarsus Ultra. Captain Ventris destroying the hydrogen plasma refineries in orbit to the planet to destroy a looming Hive Fleet advance. Regardless of his gains made, the Mortifactus chapter sided with Krypton's assessment, committing Exterminatus upon Cordelis without Uriel's consent. Adapting to the successful application of space refinery traps, the Leviathan turns its strategies against the Imperials. The lapse in defenses, allowing the Tyranids to invade Tarsus Ultra, besieging it for weeks of grueling warfare. Captain Ventris, fighting alongside a kill team led by Captain Bannon, securing Elector prisoner, Magos biologist Fianco Lucard concocted a biological plague derived from its genetic code. Deploying the plague to infect the tendril's Norn Queen, the induced hyperevolution which spread across the Hive Fleet's left tendril caused its thralls to turn on one another, severing their synaptic connection, assuring the salvation of Tarsus Ultra. Only 16 Astartes of the combined Ultramarines and Mortifactus forces surviving the engagement. Though Tarsus Ultra had been saved, such a countermeasure would not be replicable within the Leviathan's genetic strain again. Uriel Ventris, exiled from his kindred for his brash actions in abandoning his company to fight beside the Death Watch to whom he had once been seconded. As the remaining Tyranids of Tarsus Ultra were purged, the other tendril of Leviathan hurtled inexorably towards new prey. Admiral Justus Van Avikar breathed out slowly over his auspicator relay. Xenos life signs winked red amidst the scattered sapphire shades of the glittering shield. There were just so many of them.
Cryosavant Frost, report,
he breathed, his voice parched.
They are slowing. It appears as if the glittering shield is claiming new victims, my liege,
purred the robot savant to his right, the cryo-savant's silver-blue eyes dilated in a flurry of serial clicks.
Appears,
hissed Van Avikar.
Are they dead, or aren't they?
The cryo-savant leaned in close, his gaunt features underlit by the auspicator's glare. A cold second slid past, then another, each seeming like an hour. As the assembled officers watched, the last of the red life sigils turned completely white.
The Xenos craft are all dead, Admiral,
he replied smoothly, puffing out his chest and straightening his robes as if he himself had slain the Xenos threat.
Not a single biosign amongst them.
Emperor's halo, breathed Van Avikar, puffing out his cheeks.
All right, Captain Gesserick, all ahead full, if you please. Let's shatter the corpses before the grunts in the Castellan belt claim all the glory.
Aye, sir, replied the captain proudly, cascading the Admiral's orders across the bridge. The Brutus came alive with activity once more. Van Avikar returned to his command throne, surreptitiously wiping sweat from the back of his neck. A narrow escape, to be sure. The Admiral's mind filled with visions of promotion as he began laying plans for the total destruction of the Tyranid Hive Fleet. An hour of bustling preparation passed, then another. The Brutus Macaria thrummed with activity from prow to stern as it prepared to blast apart the corpses of the Tyranid fleet. Up on the supervessel's bridge, a muscle chime rang out, its softness in stark contrast to its message.
Admiral,
stuttered Frost. The lights on the auspicator below his jutting chin were changing color. turning his haggard face from pallid white to an unhealthy red.
What is it, Frost?
The life sigils, Admiral. They're changing back.
The auspicator chime pinged again, then again, the first drops of noise growing into a tinkling shower of sound. Hive Fleet Leviathan gaining strength with its feast made upon the Octaria system, whilst the Vanguard would remain to continue the fighting. Another passed the Maelstrom warp zone in search of more dangerous prey. Now the largest tendril of its forces, having grown fat on the Greenskins, the clandestine strategic collective of the Imperium, comprised of high-ranking Inquisitors and Magos Biologists, gave their findings of the Stark Report to the High Lords of Terra. Determining that the Leviathan's armies were merely a reconnaissance force made ahead of the true bulk of invasion forces, nothing short of a 500-fold mobilization of military forces would stem the tide. The engorged red tendril of Leviathan, spreading its grasp across the region of space known as the Red Scar, this sector of crimson-tinged worlds was all that stood between annihilation and the homeworld of Sanguinius, Baal. Chapter Master Luis Dante, establishing a means to slow the Leviathan's advance, the so-called Cryptus Shield Worlds, would consist of several outposts such as Tartarus, Asphodex, Lysios, Eros, and Perdita. Buying time for the Astartes, as Dante sent word for every successor chapter of the Blood to make all haste to defend the Baal system. The first line of mortal defense, consisting of Tempestus Scions, Order of the Sacred Rose, and innumerable guard regiments, stood fast. The twin sons of the Red Scar, known as the Eyes of Cryptus, causing carcinomas and skin radiation to those who do not shelter from their embrace. Though billions toil beneath its rays, the Imperium for years had struggled to fully capitalize on its vast mineral wealth. The so-called Cryptoid Tendril, worming its way through the Cryptus system during 998.1041, Vitria was the first planet to fall as recompense for the destruction of its Genestealer cults. The High Lords of Terra, sanctioning the fortification of the Cryptus system. Though Space Marine support could not be secured, the mortal defenders of mankind would face the Cryptoid Tendril in efforts to prevent its spread to Baal. Perfectly situated to quarantine the Tendril due to its hardy local populace of over 40 billion souls, the rife outbreaks of crime throughout the Cryptus system required all to carry weapons for protection, without even considering the military might of their PDF forces. Cadian shock troop regiments, led by General Malon Drost, adding their might to the conflict, over 3 million in number. Tank regiments of the 1,635th Vestroyan Firstborn Mechanized bolstered their might as elements of the Adeptus Auroritas garrisoned the convent fortress of Lysios. Tens of thousands of Sisters of Battle pledged to the command of Canoness Magda Grace of the Order of the Sacred Rose. The asteroid belt known as the Aegis Diamando, or Glittering Shield, would prove a valuable choke point to break up the oncoming Hive Fleet. Its macrocrystals, some sizing as large as planetoids, forming geometric shapes of polygons which glisten within the void. Cryptus's horde, as the Lysites would know it, flash froze any intruder which entered its network. The shield worlds preparing for the chance that mayhaps the Hive Fleet would traverse through the Aegis Diamando using scarce thermal tunnels. Those who passed through would compete with the gun mines of the Castellan Belt on the other side. The shadow in the warp, casting its pall over the Cryptus system, the first wave to attempt to traverse the glittering shield, ploughing through en masse rather than into thin columns. Such forces were rendered into frozen stellar debris, seen initially as a great victory for the Imperium. Yet the navy cordon of the shield worlds registered the slain to be dividing into 6 smaller clusters, Imperial High Command disregarding such a maneuver as mere death spasms devoid of purpose. Unfurling its tentacles once passing through the Aegis Diamando, having encased itself in secretions which protected from the cold, the Imperial Armada was cast aside with ease, first to incur the wrath of the Tendril, being the worlds of Lysios and Asphodex. Canoness Grace, having fought the Tyranids prior on the world of Desecran, knew the danger looming above better than any, only a week's preparation given to her to repel such a foe before they made landfall. Taking position within Aquapolita Prime, allied with the native Cryptite population, their crawler hulks formed a mobile fortress wall surrounded by the Sisters' armored vehicles. Beset by Tyrannocyte swarms, burrow spores, and spore mine barrages, as hulking bioforms let loose their fury, Retributor squads unleashed Melter, Heavy Bolter, and Flame of Fire upon their foes. Seraphim soared above, as Rhino treads ground through Xenos corpses below, the volleys of Exorcist tanks leaving trailing arcs of smoke as their warhead detonations slew untold horrors. The Vestroyan Firstborn upon the orbiting moon of Ixoi, combating the Subtendril which sought to claim their defensive lines of armor. Their rings of Lehman Russ tank squadrons patrolled the Great Teba terminus. Tank Commander Dimitran leading the intercept charge against the initial wave of spores. Though their payloads could not miss fighting such numbers, each targeted larger leader beasts in an attempt to send their forces into disarray. Carnifexes cast back by Baneblade and Stormhammer fire, the concentrated firepower of the Postroyans reaping an enormous toll until the Tyranids burrowed beneath the surface, preparing to ambush their foes above. Raveners erupted from the moon's barren landscape, tearing tank formations apart from within, the lack of armor on their undersides making even the sturdiest of war machines ripe prey for the talons of such foes. Yellow miasmas snaking towards the Postroyan lines, concealing killers within their embrace. As the first day of combat drew to a close, the Imperials realized the true bulk of their enemy's forces had yet to be deployed. Victory seemingly within reach upon Lysios below. Meanwhile, upon Asphodex, General Drost waded through political red tape in order to defend the prattling aristocracy from their own ignorance. Fortifying the city of Phodia, the Cadians utilized the mega metropolis's labyrinthine terrain to their advantage. Thousands of bottlenecks, evening the odds of their inferior numbers, capitalizing on ancient ruins which form the foundation of their defenses. Creating a mirror of Cadia's grandeur as the first wave of invasion commenced. Phodia's walls were crammed with slain Tyranids as counter-barrages of Hydra flak tanks and storms of lasfire felt gargoyles and shrikes aplenty. Bullgrins forming shield walls to block streets as grenadiers hurled explosives from behind their formations. Hellhound squadrons harnessed the High Fleet's Promethean relay pipes to bolster their purging flame. Yet no matter the ingenuity of the Cadians, Tyranids still vomited swarms from on high, their endless-seeming numbers clogging the arteries of Phodia with their slain, as an enormous bioform tore through the most heavily defended zones. As one plaza was reclaimed, another would fall. The relentless advance of the Great Devourer thinned and replenished constantly. The gas giant of Erdos, classified as a civilized world, next to incur the Leviathan's wrath. The Erosian gas refineries proving difficult to fortify. Typical Astra Militarum doctrines would prove impossible to apply to such difficult terrain with a much smaller population to protect. Major Henrik Genstow of the Cadian 1433rd Airborne deploying forces from the mining platforms of Ventor Alphas and Ventor Chi. Bioships surrounded the gas giant in short order as Imperial pilots itched for a chance to finally combat their foe. Shooting down hordes of such bloated voidcraft, each that fell was swiftly replaced, many peculiarly stopping at a halt to loom menacingly above for some unknown reason. Fighting to prevent the splinter tendril from achieving critical mass, squadrons of Valkyries combated enormous flying monstrosities before Genstow converged his remaining 3 squadrons to regroup at Ventor Alphas, ready to make their final stand. The death world of Tartarus, housing a meager population of only 30,000 souls, Lord Commissar Strengel oversaw the war effort upon its surface, interpreting reports from the worlds of Lysios and Asphodex of the impending invasion. Beset by a force of broodpods far larger than anticipated, each deposited not a swarm but a single hulking foe as thousands of Tyrannocytes descended upon the solar farms of Furnace Dome. Hordes of Carnifexes charging the void shield of Strengel's defenses and setting upon the generator complex, their talons cutting through Dornium coils, pipework, and cabling in efforts to disable the facility. Within an hour, technological boons of industry were sundered, the smell of ozone forewarning of the eyes of Cryptus' searing heat which began to irradiate the Imperial defenders. Garviel Dome, Cryptgate Dome, and Treventius Dome ruptured alike to eggshells by the force of a hammer. Lord Commissar Strengel prepared to make one final defiant strike to inflict what injury the defenders of Tartarus could muster. The Lord Commissar doubled back, his footprint sending puffs of dust into the air as he ran headlong for the relative safety of the shattered shield domes. He had attacked the beasts head-on, despite the fact his skin was burning and his eyes were boiling in their sockets. Surely he had earned the right to regroup, to find others who had shown less bravery in the name of the Emperor and punish them instead. His mind whirled, casting about for ways to salvage some kind of progress from this disaster. Somehow, he had lost his peaked cap. He scratched his itching scalp, and his hand came back with a clump of loose hair. His skin was taut and hot. He had to get back into shelter, and fast. Given enough time, they could form echelons on the arid plains and level enough fire to keep the Xenos fiends away. Maybe, if he could jury-rig one of the transmitters that he could see poking up from the crackling wreck of the gen stations, they could even summon some aerial backup and enact a fighting retreat all the way off-planet. It was still possible. It had to be. Strengel sprinted for the shelter of a ruined Vox Dome, with skull-tipped antennae bristling from its roof. He darted into the shadow, pulling his black greatcoat over the brass of his carapace armor to blend better with the darkness. Out on the Tartaran plain, he could still see the Xenos monsters rampaging through the Cadian lines, unstoppable as an avalanche of boulders and just as impervious to harm. There was a screech of metal from his right. The Lord Commissar turned, bloodshot eyes wide, a small part of him hoping to see a fellow human, but the better part of him knew that he would see nothing of the sort. Two narrow eyes stared out at him. Within their void-black darkness, Strangle saw again a cold intelligence that shocked him to his soul. Then the Wrecker Beast's talon swept down, and Strangle knew no more. The raindrops of slaughter had now formed into a deluge. The world of Asphodex enduring reinforcements by Zoanthropes, which beset their armored sentinel and Baneblade vanguard. Genestealers rising from the depths to harry the Cadian lines as Tyrant Guards drew fire from their advance. The invasion's Hive Tyrant carved through the Bulgrin lines, breaking what morale remained. Reinforcements of the Capic Eagles of the Militarum Tempestus, descending from the heavens in the Cadian's time of greatest need. The winged persecution deployed squads of peerless warriors as Tempesta Prime Abraxas beheld the war he had foreseen on Vitria. Evacuating what could be salvaged from the ailing Cadian lines, capillary towers descended upon Asphodex, unconcerned by the mortal defenders as the Feast of the Leviathan began in earnest. Lysios fared better, yet Canoness Grace knew that their reprieve would be brief. Her Ordo Dialogus attendants preaching the Emperor's glory from Vox Skulls and Hailers aplenty to improve morale. Lictors attempting to assassinate the champion of the Sacred Rose as her Celestian Honor Guard formed a circle to defend their leader. Sister Elspeth, though giving her life to defend the Canoness, could not prevent her incurring a wound from such a beast. Slaying the Lictor during a brawl atop her Exorcist tank, the moon of Ixoi above forebode doom as its surface, even from such a distance, was noticeably tainted by the Devourer's embrace. Within 2 days, the Cryptus system had fallen, forcing its populace to flee the ruined fiefdoms as even the Tempesta Scions faltered. Millions of refugees braving the dangers of void space, even infested by the Devourer's tendrils. Less than 1,000 sisters braced for the end, Magda Grace submitting to her wounds incurred by the Lictor, as Ixoi, now suffocated in yellow mist, obscured the carcasses of proud Vostroyan armor. Asphodex was overrun, with General Drost nowhere to be found. The Krypton shield, though destined to break, nonetheless shattering with a speed which not even Commander Dante could have foreseen. Having readied a sizable force to answer their calls for aid, though departing as soon as they received word from Cryptus, nothing could prepare the amassed forces of the Blood for what they would find upon arrival in system. Blood Angels and Flesh Terrors reaching the system by the 5th day, too late to be of help. The battle barge Blade of Vengeance led the charge with Dante presiding over its command deck. Horrified to have witnessed how quickly the mortal defenders had been quelled, already the Leviathan gorged on every planet of the Shield Worlds, unabated. First Captain Carleon and Chief Librarian Mephiston sifting through data shadows on the turmoil below. Easily, 1 million Tyranid Voidcraft and trillions of bioforms upon the Shield World surfaces were a shocking sight to see. Not a single Voxcast nor transmission could be registered. 3 days of fighting all that was required to have sundered a force not mustered since the Black Scourge of 993.M41, like it was nothing more than a nuisance. Sighting an evacuation fleet roaming the far side of the system, Dante surmised perhaps 1/10 of the Cryptus population to be within, more than 35 billion souls destroyed in little more than an instant, leaving but a fraction of their civilization intact. Deploying forces to combat the Tyranids upon Asphodex and Lysios in efforts to interrupt their feast, Tartarus and Ixoi were ignored due to no human life signs remaining on their surfaces. Eidos, showing signs of fighting, however small, Captain Aphael led his second company forces to Eidos in search of survivors and find a means to clear the atmosphere of the gas giant with aid from sanguinary High Priest Corbulo. Corbulo's efforts to find stockpiles of Satrix elixirs, believing them to contain insight on the cure to the Red Thirst and Black Rage. Dante and Mephiston would simultaneously lead the Archangels of the First Company and a demi-company of the Second to investigate Asphorex. Strike cruisers led by Captain Phaeton venturing towards the refugee fleet in efforts to save them from the Leviathan's hunger. Lastly, Chapter Master Gabriel Seth would set upon Lysios to clear a landing zone for his Flesh Terror's forces.
Get on board, Chaplain!
Seth's voice was like the growling of a chainblade.
No,
said Apollos.
we cannot just leave.
We can and we must.
Temel and the others, have you forgotten they are out there?
I am aware of our current deployment status.
And you would leave them anyway.
I have told you the emergent threat is dire, one the Blood Angels cannot stop alone.
Dante calls and you come running.
Seth snarled and stepped forward, pressing his forehead against Apollus's.
The years we have stood together, brother, the blood we have spilled together, those things have brought you your life this day.
Seth bunched his fists.
On Sanguinius' name, if you ever speak to me in such a manner again, I'll kill you.
Apollos led his group in silence. Harahel felt his finger drift to the activation stud on his eviscerator. He stood at the top of the Thunderhawk's ramp, watching Seth and Apollos below. Seth was the greatest warrior the Flesh Terrors had known since Amit, but there was a darkness in Apollos, a brutal savagery that had seen him unbeaten in the dueling cages. Both of them were irreplaceable, heroes of the chapter. Harahel hoped he would not be required to intervene. Seth took a step back and regained his composure.
Baal is at stake, Apollos. The Tyranids have consumed all before them. If we do not go now, Baal will fall.
And what of it? Let the Blood Angels worry about Baal. What of this world? Is it any less important?
Did you insult me with feigned ignorance? You know it is.
Baal is not our world.
It is Sanguinius' world. It is our father's home.
Our father is gone.
Apollos struggled to keep his voice level.
Under the twin red suns of death shall the reckoning of my sons be. By the grace of the Golden Warrior will their fate be writ, and by their actions will he know courage. Against the unknown foe will they fight, a beast that holds the doom of men within its jaws. This will be a war they cannot win, and failure here will herald the coming of the end.
I have read the scrolls of Sanguinius, but how many must die so that Dante can triumph? How many of our brothers' lives is Baal worth?
All of them!
Seth paced away, turning back on the chaplain.
We need Baal, Apollos.
The memory of nobility does not change who we are.
No, it does not.
Seth turned back to Apollos, his shoulders heavy about his frame.
But without it, we are lost. How can we ever find our way back from the brink if we have nothing to turn back to?
Apollos said nothing, standing a moment in silence before stepping past Seth and onto the Thunderhawk. Alike to a crimson spear, the scions of Sanguinius rained down from the heavens upon the core worlds. Port Helos, the only holdout of Imperial resistance upon Asphodex, within the heart of the Tyranid horde. Rallying the Phodian defenders within less than an hour, Dante's host paved the way for their support personnel and heavy armor to land. The Tyranid counterattack striking only minutes later, organized by an immense psychic presence. Setting up positions within the port's southern gate, Dante and Mephiston felled a trio of Maleceptors imbued with the Hivemind's presence. The Cadians bombarding the swarm with their spear-tip destroyed, using basilisk warheads. Meanwhile upon Lysios, the Flesh Terrors advanced, forming a defensive perimeter around the intact Magnovitrium solar relay, which would be vital in the future. The moon of Ixoi's pull on Lysios' tides, causing a vast tsunami to crash upon the surface, smiting many Tyranids. The nomadic survivors of the scourge of the planet within their landcrawlers formed a convoy fated to die without Astartes' intervention. Gabriel Seth deploying a fast-moving strike team directly above the convoy. This armored cordon of rhinos and predator tanks would protect the survivors from the encroaching swarm, as the Lysite populace which remained rejoiced. The Solarium transport within the heart of the convoy, retaining a connection to the Magnovitrium in orbit. Remnants of the Order of the Sacred Rose's armored divisions joined forces with the Flesh Terrors as they pushed through the nearest cityscape. Sister Superior Amity, successor to Magda Grace, apprising Seth of their tactical options. The Guardian of Rage knew that time was of the essence, with the only hope of evacuation being to scatter the swarm. Carving a path through their horde with their vehicles, the convoy had no choice but to continue in the heart of the enemy. Sisters of Alabaster and Seraphs of Dark Crimson, laying waste to the denizens of the Ghost City towards the planet's seabed. Stripped of their contents with the recent tsunami, the convoy avoided sinkholes and algae pits below as best they could, trailing thousands of Tyranids in their wake as the Hivemind attempted to bar their path. Diverting their forces to the original Cathedrum, 10 miles away, deployed by the Sacred Rose prior to the campaign on the Isle of Shells. Though abandoned, the shrine stood atop a stone plateau, perhaps with its gun batteries and void shield remaining intact. Finding shelter within the Cathedrum, within the so-called Cursed City, the Flesh Terrors and Sisters of Battle set up defensive positions, whilst the nomadic crawlers drove deeper into the compound. Tech Marines locating the void shield generators as their kindred held off the Tyranid swarm. Meanwhile, in orbit of the gas giant of Eros, Brother Corbulo and Captain Ephael stood aboard the command deck of the Wings of Baal during its descent. Deploying aerial forces due to the lack of terrain, the Blood Angels fought to the primary refinery platform, encountering faint Cadian battle ciphers which guided them through the horde. Identifying weapons fire within the center of the cityscape's cathedral, the garrison of less than 500 Cadians rejoiced at the sight of the Emperor's angels answering their prayers for salvation. Yet several billion miles from the conflict, the prison barges dispatched by General Dross to distract the Hivemind's forces were scuttled, their crash landing upon the frozen wastes of Perdita, awakening an ancient enemy from its slumber. The abandoned conflict stumbling into the guns of the Mefrit dynasty, their overlord, Zarathustra the Ineffable, peered into space, witnessing the Wardens returning from whence they came, back to the Castellan Belt. Perceiving the Great Devourer laying waste to the Cryptus system, the Overlord, though not the mightiest of the Necron rulers, rallied his own forces to confront this mysterious new enemy.
You will need allies,
repeated Dovetlan. The Praetorians moved to surround the traveler. Their message was clear, but Anrakhir grew tired of their sudden upsurge in communication.
We know where you will find them,
said Ameg.
Where?
Asked Anrakhir, his frustration rising.
Where we are already bound,
answered Dovetlan.
The Zarathusans. Yes,
said Catalan.
No,
said Dovetlan.
Probably,
finished Ameg.
They will need help,
began Catalan.
But you will need more assistance to defeat these Tyranids. You cannot rely upon the Zarathusans to stand firm against these foes. We know of others who will assist. Who? The Silent King? No,
said Ameg.
The living.
Anrakhir laughed.
Why would the living accept our help? For the same reason you would seek them out. They are desperate. You are desperate. Desperation does not cause beings to take leave of their wits, nor does it ignore history.
Anrakhir growled.
After what we have wrought here, after what we have wrought all over their empire, why would they agree to assist us? Because they have done so before. These Tyranids create strange alliances. Their threat is monumental in scope. The Silent King knows this, and has allowed for a loosening of the old prohibitions. You have hinted at this alliance before. Your decorations betray an organic taint. We fought alongside the humans at the Silent King's command once before. The alliance was convenient and ensured his victory there,
said Ameg.
We wear these decorations as a mark of honor and a reminder. Tell me more,
said Anrakhir. Having created the solar farming techniques harnessed by their network of solar refractors in times of yore, though the Imperium had laid claim to the Cryptus system, the Leviathan had committed an even graver sin, consuming its once great majesty. Unhindered by the shadow in the warp, the Necrons under the command of Anrakhir the Traveler began their attempts to eradicate the Devourer, their overlords disgust for their greed, considering them alike to a galactic vermin that could not be allowed to live. Knowing Perdita to be doomed should the heart of the High Fleet's tendrils not be severed, Anrakhir activated his armada's inertialess drives to breach past the Hivemind's smothering psychic barrier to reach the domains of the Mefrit dynasty. Unhindered by the Aegis Diamando, the Necrons of Anrakhir traveled to Perdita to aid Zarathustra's forces, allying together in order to devise plans to prevent their Tombworld's demise. As the Scions of the Blood continued their campaigns across Asphodex, Lysios, and Eros, the Necrons made their presence known. Their claim to the system as its original inhabitants, evidenced by their technology's artificial binding of the Eyes of Cryptus. Port Helos, holding fast under the leadership of Commander Dante, both the Psychos of the Blood and Hivemind sensed crescent-shaped voidcraft looming from orbit. Instantly recognizing the Necron species' arrival to Asphodex, completely ignoring the war raging on Lysios, Dante witnessed bioships in orbit be torn asunder, yet no sign of the Necrons' guns turning upon the Blood Angels' fleet. A monolith to the Eternal Empire descending upon Dante's position beyond the walls of Port Helos. As further monoliths set upon the Tyranids, Anrakhir the Traveler strode from his transport, ignoring the bolters trained on his form. Opening an outstretched hand towards Dante, asking for an audience in High Gothic, his proposal to eradicate the Leviathan, an alliance of convenience which neither side could deny. Unable to destroy the Tyranids in a conventional manner, even with their combined strength, Anrakhir proposed the use of a dreaded Necron weapon, the Magnovitrium, known to the Necrons as the Starflame. Capable of harnessing the twin stars of the system, not simply as an energy relay, but as a concentrated blast. Should it be fired to ignite Eros, the explosion would scour the system of Tyranids, whilst using the core worlds to shield their own forces from the destruction. Doubtful of its efficacy to destroy the High Fleet, Dante regardless had no alternative choice to accept, sanctioning Anrakhir's strategy for the sake of Baal. Requiring the control of the Magnovitrium in orbit of Tartaros, vapor conveyors of Eros, cogitator spires of Asphodex, and the last remaining solarium of Lysios, the coordinated efforts of all forces in system must work in unison to achieve their goal. Anrakhir deploying his men to secure the Magnovitrium whilst fighting at the side of Dante within the Phodian Fabrique district, Orders were relayed to Gabriel Seth to secure the relay on Lysios, whilst Captain Aphael would reach the vapor conveyors on Eros. Dante and Anrakir, setting upon the city of Phodia, now festering with bioforms. Their combined assault of Astartes above and Necrons below beset the Fabricator's Gate. Pinned down by a Biotitan on the surface, as Anrakir's forces were bottlenecked into the tunnels beneath, Anrakir unleashed the Catan Shard, Nyadra Zatha, the Burning One, to clear their path, sundering the Biotitan and severing capillary towers with its fists. As the Necrons and Blood Angels breached the Cogitator spires, meanwhile, the Flesh Terrors protected the Magnavitrium uplink as long as they could, drop pods descending from the heavens to reinforce Seth's position. Sisters and Angels falling with the continued harrying by the Leviathan. Many Flesh Terrors surrendered to their red first, causing their defensive position to falter as Seth struggled to restrain his own fury. Withdrawing closer to the Solarium, Seth refused to abandon his duty to protect the connection to the Magnavitrium, whilst on far distant Eros, Captain Aphael's forces rescued the Cadians on the primary refinery platform. Sanguinary High Priest Corbulo reaching the location of the Satrix. Lieutenant Dormand of the Cadians informed the Blood Angel that the warehouse had been destroyed to deny the Tyranids from consuming the biomass of Captain Cauldron and his men. Angered by the frailty of mortals, Corbulo turned his killing fury against the Leviathan with his chainsword, Heaven's Teeth. Captain Aphael reorganizing his forces in light of Dante's command, alongside reinforcements from Zarathustra, the Ineffable. Holding the vapor conveyors of the platform until the time to fire was ready, the order to withdraw would be enacted once the mass exterminatus was assured, lest they doom Baal to damnation, the Necrons toiling to secure Tartarus, unfazed by its status as an irradiated death world. Chief Cryptek Xykor linking dormant gates to Perdita to allow hundreds of warriors to combat the Tyranids, now infesting the entirety of the planet. Its molten landscape during the fighting, regardless, had interrupted the power flow to the Magnavitrium. The Starflame's surface dulled with time. As its orbit decayed, Xykor sought to reach the device's controls. His miscalculation in underestimating the Tyranid threat, forcing him to warn Anrakir of his failure before being torn to shreds by an onslaught of Carnifexes. Having jeopardized the entire operation, now aware that the damage to Tartaros would cause the Magnavitrium to plummet from orbit, little would Anrakir know that Dante as a contingency had deployed a strike cruiser filled with his brethren to converge on the planet. Housing those of his company who had fallen victim to the Black Rage, as Xykor felt his necrodermis be torn to shreds, Death Company drop pods fell from the atmosphere, pitting the success of the campaign on the shoulders of the Chaplain of the Damned, Arafan. Anrakir commanding his Catan Shard to converge on their position, adding its fury to that of the Death Company. Whilst Chaplain Arafan marshaled his forces, the Catan cleansed the Magnavarium of the spores which dulled its sheen, as its necrodermis melded to its panes. Pouring its essence into the Starflame, burning away both Tyranid and human influence, the Death Company's rampage below waned as the Blade of Vengeance monitored the situation from orbit. Chaplain Arafan, accepting his fate that he shall never survive the odds arrayed at him. Those brothers of his which remained, such as Sergeant Phaeterus, held the ever-dwindling line as the chaplain sought out the Magnavitrium's controls. Yet in the Blood Angel's time of need, the Sanguinor appeared, its golden visage seen by Sergeant Phaeterus as the vision of Sanguinius himself, giving solving clarity to his last moments before death embraced him. Locating the controls, Arafan activated the device. The forces of Athael, Seth, and Dante withdrawing with all haste as the solar flare began to fire. The detonation of Eros marking the death knell of the entire Cryptus system. The wholesale destruction made by the Hive Fleet in the previous days of fighting would seem insignificant in comparison. Each bioship caught within the Magnavitrium solar beam incinerated within seconds. With the gas giant's explosion, the Blood Angels and Flesh Terrors sheltered from the doomed celestial bodies of Asphodex, Lysios, and Tartarus, regardless incurring casualties. Those unable to escape the surface were condemned to death. The highest of walls or deepest of tunnels, unable to protect Astartes, Sisters of Battle, or Militarum forces which attempted to find futile shelter. Captain Aphael escaping Eros despite losing much of his forces as the garrison of the Blast Fulcrum. The Necrons, meanwhile, phased completely from reality, returning to the war crypts of Perdita. Satisfied with their purge of the Leviathan and protective measures to preserve their tomb world, Zarathustra and Anrakir withdrew from the campaign, leaving what remained to fight amongst themselves. Billions of Tyranids had perished, and yet billions still remained, taking a longer path around the Cryptus system. Their advance to the Baal system only forestalled rather than prevented. The Blood Angels and Flesh Terrors fleeing with all haste to make preparations for the devastation to come. General Drost and what remained of the system's refugees joined the Scions of Sanguinius to help prepare for the war to come. Traversing through the Aegis Diamando, Dante knew that only one contingency remained to preserve his homeworld. The surviving tendrils of the Cryptus system converging into one with a single target capable of sating their hunger. From the data we have gathered from the Ordo Astra, and which has been provided to us by the Inquisition and other Adepta, we believe this darker course to have been Leviathan's original trajectory, said Dante. See how it looked to be avoiding the Red Scar until this sharp turning to the galactic north 12 years ago. The Red Scar is a poisonous area of space. The High Fleets as a rule seem to be drawn to rich worlds, those populous or with intact natural systems. They favor sectors with high densities of such planets and avoid perilous areas of space. But in this case, the High Fleet appears to be foregoing richer sectors in favor of a strategic goal. We believe that it is actively seeking the destruction of the Blood Angels chapter. A hubbub arose at these words.
That is impossible, Commander Dante.
Lord Malthus, chapter master of the Exsanguinators, blurted the Herald Skull.
We have fought against these creatures before. They appear cunning, but they have as much self-determination as a colony of steel mites. They are animals. They do not bear grudges.
Takyle, chapter master of the Disciples of Blood, said the Servo Skull.
Then why, 12 years ago, did Leviathan alter its course and begin to head directly to Baal?
Said another. The Skull's announcement went unheard as voices clamored at Dante. Space Marines argued with each other.
My brothers,
shouted Dante.
Scaraban, the chief librarian of the Flesh Eaters, has investigated a great deal of time into investigating this independently of our chapter. Listen to him, then judge.
Scaraban left his seat and went through a gap in the table into the hololith at the center of the room. As he talked, he strode through the stars like a celestial being. His force staff glimmered with unearthly power, as if he could not quite separate himself from the warp.
We in the Imperium see the Tyranids as a collection of creatures linked together through psychic interface, he said. It is an understandable misconception. We compare the things we fight to other foes. In this case, comparison begets false truth. There is nothing like this race of beasts in this galaxy, and therefore, nothing to accurately compare them with. We have faced heaving masses of creatures and see armies of individuals. We observe the higher forms appearing to make decisions and directing the lesser, and see officers or slave masters. The Tyranids appear as a race like any other, one that has incorporated many species into its genetic memory, and that employs radical gene engineering and psychic slavery. This is the logical interpretation. It is also wrong. The Tyranids are winning their war because the Imperium has been blind to their, or I should more accurately say, its true nature. You know the truth of its being,
Chapter Master Geron of the Angels Numinous, said the Skull. Its gravity motor growled with effort as it flew back and forth across the room.
I did not discover it, said Scaraban. This hypothesis is but one of several theories advanced, but it has the merit of being true. I have seen it.
Doubtful talk struck up.
No psychic can look into the shadow without going insane, Adeptus Astartes or not.
Sutona, 5th Captain, Angels of Light.
I have, said Scaraban.
I hear rumors that you consort with decadent Eldari to further your knowledge, said Sutona hotly.
If I have, it is to the benefit of all, said Scaraban.
Eldari destroyed the 3rd Company of my chapter not 4 years ago. They cannot be trusted.
Silence,
warned Dante. So commanding was his voice, the brewing argument was quashed instantly.
There will be no dissent, no airing of grievances. Do not do the enemy's work for him.
I have seen it too. Scaraban speaks the truth. Mephiston rose from his chair. His eyes glowed blue, and on wings of scarlet energy he flew over the heads of his peers and landed in the center of the map. His deathly pale skin lit by the dancing light of disturbed hololithic star systems. Dark mutters greeted the Lord of Death's intervention. I have looked into the shadow in the warp and seen the thing that casts it, said Mephiston. What assails our galaxy is not an army of individuals, or even a colony of social animals working as one, but a single creature, a monstrous foe of inconceivable dimensions. Scaraban is correct. We have our perception of this predator back to front. It is not as it appears, a host of creatures linked psychically. It can instead be seen as a single, massive psychic presence, a single mind. These monsters that attack us generate it. They make it as a man makes his soul, but whereas ours are individual, theirs is singular. A single predator, not many.
And when they attack each other?
Perhaps the High Fleets are different beings, one mind for each.
Perhaps they are all ultimately one. We cannot say for sure. The Tyranids are utterly alien, but we know the hive mind is real. This intelligence is emergent, coming from the billions of creatures in the swarms. But it is not an empty intellect. It is aware. It has a soul. You say then this being is a warp entity, born of the Immaterium? Asked the librarian. In our Librarius, we have theorized it is but another thing of chaos, wearing Xenos skin.
Codicia Liatomos, Brothers of the Red,
the herald announced. Scaraman shook his head. I am sure its origins are in this realm of being. We are not alone in holding this position of its nature. The reports of Inquisitor Kryptman, others in the Inquisition, and the Magos Biologists suggest so. At least those that support this interpretation. Perhaps what we are seeing is a creature part way to spiritual transcendence. A gestalt made of the minds of billions of brute animals, trapped half in and half out of the warp by unending hunger.
You suggest we fight a god?
Scoffed a space marine of cadaverous appearance. His eyes were sunken in skin that looked dry as dust.
Carnivores, bird captain, blood drinkers.
Is there a better word for such a thing? With the close of the 41st millennium, Hive Fleet Leviathan would make their final assault of the millennia. The might required to repel its advance, requiring obscene shows of force, which exceed both the ravages of Behemoth and the Kraken. 29 chapters descended from the bloodline of Sanguinius, heeding Commander Dante's call to arms. Among their number, the Angels in Carmine, Angels Excelsis, Angels Glorious, Angels of Light, Angels Numinous, Angels Penitent, Angels Sanguine, Angels Vermilion, Blood Drinkers, Blood Legion, Blood Swords, Blood Wings, Brothers of Jared, Brothers of the Red, Burning Blood, Carmine Blades, Charnel Guard, Disciples of Blood, Exsanguinators, Flesh Eaters, Flesh Tearers, Golden Suns, Knights of Blood, Red Knights, Red Wings, Sable Brotherhood, Sanguine Host, and Scions of Sanguinius pledged their might to their primogenitor, the Blood Angels. Several chapters such as the Lamenters, Sons of Sanguinius, and Atlantean Spears, nonetheless either refusing or unable to heed Dante's call. 21 battle barges, 94 strike cruisers, untold escort vessels, and an assemblage of space marines akin to a legion of yore stood opposed to annihilation as 6 battle fleets patrolled the borders to the Cryptus system. Second Captain Irwin of the Angels Excelsis, aboard his voidcraft, the Splendid Pinion, witnessed to the destruction of the world of Psyopatha and its population of 5.5 million souls. With 3 isolated bioships destroyed, the capable naval commander made way to Baal. Chief Librarian Mephiston, foreseeing visions of the fall of Cadia in attempts to divine the fate of the Blood Angels task force dispatched to the Diamor campaign, the intervention of a mysterious Harlequin showed portents of the danger to come. Foreseeing the Bane of Angels, Kabanda, in the wake of enormous unrest within the warp, the 5th Company's warships, Angelic Blade and Flame of Baal now lost, forced Mephiston to contact Dante regarding such dire portents. As Chapter Command contained the Baal Secundus relay station, Captain Irwin happened upon a void skirmish led by Blood Angels Captain Asante, refusing to allow the Angels' numinous voidcraft, Staff of Light, from falling into enemy hands. Boarding the voidcraft, rooting out the Genestealer infestation within. Upon finding a lone survivor of the chapter, Sergeant Hennon, the Astartes revealed the ship's functions to be incapable of traversing through the warp and had been left as a decoy. Refusing to allow such a splendid vessel to fall, Captain Irwin concocted a strategy to activate his own ship's warp drives within the heart of the swarm, the daring maneuver succeeding in destroying swathes of the enemy as the Staff of Light followed in the Splendid Pinion's wake. As Asante's battle fleet traversed to Baal, Mephiston revealed to Dante the loss of the majority of the 5th Company, 94 Astartes now trapped within Diamor, with much of their number subsumed to the Black Rage, another calamitous blow for the chapter. Half of the Blood Angel's strength was gone, yet 5 days following the Splendid Pinion's salvation of the Angel's numinous war vessel, their might would arrive in system, Captain Irwin unknowingly bringing a conniving stowaway within the bowels of his ship. Thousands of disparate Sons of Sanguinius rallied to prepare the defenses of the crucial bastions of the Blood, the Arx Angelicum of Baal and its twin moons, Baal Primus and Baal Secundus. Yet as such preparations were made, the lictor aboard the Splendid Pinion landed upon Baal, burying itself beneath its sands until the opportunity to strike presented itself. Each captain of the Blood, unsure of their standing amongst the assembled hierarchy, all regardless willingly fought at the behest of their ancient commander Dante, his pedigree as perhaps the most accomplished living warrior of the Astartes undeniable. Chief Librarian Mephiston,
delving into the depths of the Sorcery Arcanum to speak with the entombed custodian of its fell relics, the former chief librarian, Lord Marist. This enormous dreadnought allowed the Lord of Death passage to converse with an ancient imprisoned foe sealed within the Vault of Marist. Interrogating the chaos-corrupted Xenos, known as the Octo-Calveri, this last of its species confirmed Mephiston's visions of Ka'Bandha to be true, stating that one day they shall be allies should the chief librarian survive his ordeal to come. Confiding his visions of Chaos's impending resurgence with Dante prior to the Red Council of all chapters present, no doubt the Bloodthirster waited for the optimal time to claim skulls aplenty, as war ravaged the soil of Baal's domains, making the Sons of Sanguinius even more vulnerable to surrendering to their bloodlust. Committing to their operational command structure before battle could be joined, with the Red Council concluded, Dante met with Gabriel Seth whilst organizing transports to take the Genesteed stored upon Baal far from the peril to come. Bequeathing Seth with the reliquary of Ammit, storing a clutch of feathers from Sanguinius' toil made upon the Siege of Terra. None were said to have touched the ground before being interred within the stasis canister. Admiring Seth's tenacity in staving off the call of the Black Rage for so long, Dante entrusted the rightful heirloom of his chapter as a symbol of their reconciliation as sons of the Great Angel. Gathering aspirants from the moons of Baal Primus and Secundus to be armed and delivered to aid the defense of the Arx Angelicum, more than 40,000 youths would fight by the side of over 12,000 Astartes and would become angels themselves should they survive the campaign. The Blood Angels' fleet in orbit, venturing forth to confront the enemy in the void in an attempt to blunt their advance. Meanwhile, the Flesh Terrors alongside 5,000 kindred ventured to Baal Primus to fight beside the Knights of Blood, while 6,000 manned positions across Baal Secundus. First Blade Centaur Jewel, requesting Seth that his men would fight by his side. The Guardian of Rage refused such an offering, seeing the Knights of Blood as a mirror of his own chapter's path to damnation, which he would struggle to the end, not to dread. Dante dreaming of a golden seraph prior to the opening engagement, for the first time his vision of the Master of Mankind upon his golden throne had changed. For little would he know why, his mighty sword, no longer present, laid across his knee. Another ill omen to presage the battle which may sunder his chapter's legacy forevermore.
Tigurius staggered. His staff and bolt pistol slipped from numb fingers. The creature hissed and slunk around him. He could feel it prying at the gates of his mind, scrabbling about in the shadows of his consciousness. His limbs felt heavy and awkward, and he sank down once more, borne under by the enormity of its will. The world gave a spasm, like a faulty pick feed. He smelled rancid meat and heard a riotous murmur that overwhelmed his thoughts. Smashing them aside, he felt heat and hunger, a terrible hunger. The hunger tore through Tigurius, smashing aside his certainties and assurances, his confidence and surety, in a way it had never done before. All of it, all of his training, his skill, his power as chief librarian, was as nothing before this inhumane ache, and he realized with a growing horror that he had never truly faced the hive mind before, that his hunger was a roaring inferno compared to the flickering spark he had touched previously. It was a hunger such as a fire might feel, enormous and unending, a hunger which would never know appeasement and would never abate, not even when the last sun had flickered and died, leaving the galaxy a cold, barren void at last. And then, the hunger would not end. Even then the hive mind would hunt, feeding on itself until at last, the surviving shard of its intelligence withered and starved, alone in the dark and quiet. But before that, it would feed on every world. It would batten on every star and strip every system and sector of life. The Imperium would fall to it. There would be no salvation, no last-minute reprieve. The murmurs grew in volume, and he clutched uselessly at his head, trying to block them out. As Tigurius fought, trying to shutter the gates of his mind, scraps of sound and memory burned across the horizon of his fort. He saw flickering images, as if he were seeing through the eyes of the hive mind as it spread out to consume Ultima Segmentum. He heard the slow scrape of the monster's claws as it advanced towards him across the street, but he could not rise to confront it, could not stifle the images which overwhelmed his mind with thoughts and memories not his own. They were flashes only, brief moments of time, crystallized and vivid. He saw Sisters of Battle fighting back-to-back with Militarum Tempestus Scions as a tidal wave of chitin and talons loomed over them, ready to sweep them aside. He felt fear and pains as the images burst like a bubble, parting to reveal a Terminator clad in the crimson heraldry of the Blood Angels chapter, grappling with a multi-limbed Broodlord in his burning ruins of an Imperial palace. As the Broodlord swiped its cruel claws across his brother Space Marine's chestplate, Tigurius clutched at his own, feeling the pain of the blow as if he'd taken it himself.
His mind reeled as the scene wavered and tore, revealing the sleek voidcraft of the Eldar, locked in battle with a swarm of flying horrors birthed by the Hive Fleet. He felt ground tremble beneath him as the beast drew closer. The alien stink of it was thick in his nostrils, but he could not focus, could not even see it. The images came faster and faster, overwhelming him with their intensity. Some small part of his mind knew that the creature was using them to batter him, to weaken him, even as Tigurius himself had used his powers so many times to weaken the Tyranid swarms, to make them easy prey. His head felt full to bursting. He was a warrior of the Grey Knights, trapped between the gibbering filth of the warp and a horde of Hormagaunts. Even as the Grey Knight moved to confront his foes, the image came apart like sand in the tide, and suddenly, Tigurius was caught in the stultifying darkness. He saw green lights and heard the squeal of ancient machinery coming to life, but too late. The steel-limbed Necron warriors awoke from the slumber of ages as the Tyranids flooded the tomb, smashing the automatons down as they rose. He smelled and tasted blood. Blood angels and flesh terrors fought against overwhelming hordes beneath a blood-red star, and he felt their rage and madness as if it were his own. It threatened to overwhelm him, and he cried out. The image shattered, and he was smashed to the ground by a heavy blow. Another blow caught him across the back, and he felt his armor rupture. He rolled over with a groan, mind sluggish, body barely responding. Hoses popped and seals burst in his armor as its weight settled on him, driving his wounded back against the street. Its featureless skull loomed over him as he struggled uselessly against it. Blossoms of ectoplasm sprouted on its head, unfurling and growing, becoming tendrils like the ones which had been the cause of Geta's death. The tendrils quivered and shot toward him. Something cold touched him, and the darkness invaded him. It was stronger than the scream, impossible to resist. His thoughts were ground under the relentless clamor of an alien intelligence far older and crueler than he had ever suspected. This intelligence was nothing like the others. The Leviathan was stronger than the Behemoth and more dangerous than the Kraken. Worse, he'd been wrong. There was a mind there, amidst the hunger, a true mind, a fierce self-awareness that put the torch to every assumption and scrap of knowledge about the Tyranids that he'd possessed. And that mind hated him. It wanted vengeance. It wanted him. For the first time, Varro Tigurius felt the first strings of fear. Such a thing could not be defeated. His will was as nothing next to that of the hive mind. It would devour him, and the Cantapur, and after that, the subsector. It could not be stopped. Even Holy Terror would fall. As the Void War began, over 100 of the finest Astartes warships known to man plunged headfirst into the fray. Captain Erwin among their numbers, as 6,000 Astartes manned their many voidcraft. Broadsides aplenty set upon the vast swarm of bioships, their attempts to fight as a cohesive force undermined, as each in turn were isolated and torn apart by overwhelming hordes of smaller organic voidcraft and spores. Dozens were cut down, yet hundreds remained, a second wave of the Hive Fleet disgorging untold thousands more ships into the midst of the battle, as several chapters including the Angels Excelsius were annihilated. Captains Bellerophon, Asanta, and Erwin, all perishing during the doomed formation. This war would be determined on the soil of Baal, as what remained of the rapidly dwindling fleet withdrew from the catastrophic engagement. The Sanguinary Brotherhood taking up arms within fortified Heresy-era ruins of Baal. Most important of all defensible positions would be that of the Arx Angelicum, the moat created to surround its domains, filled with thirst water to stave off the ground assault, further bolstered by their fortress monastery's immense void shield. Mycetic spores darkened the skies as the shadow in the warp guttered light from the stars. The constant rain of artillery and bolter fire unleashing wrath not seen since the dark days of the Siege of Terra itself. Chief Librarian Mephiston gathering his fellow witchkin to seek a means to prevent the return of Karbanda. Upon ruby wings, the Lord of Death led the charge of his transport to the Kruar Mountains, far beyond the Angelicum's boundaries. Conducting a dangerous ritual within the mountain's vast quarry Ruberica, or Heart of Baal, the librarians confronted the demon within the realm of Khorne, yet failed to prevent it breaching the portal to the Blood God's realm. Escaping into the mortal realm, descending upon Baal Primus to face hordes of the Tyranids, Karbanda's escape had trapped Mephiston and his cohort within the Ruberica, preventing them from aiding their beleaguered kin. The constant barrages of warfare stirring the Lictor insurgent which had remained hidden amongst the sands of Baal. The war zone's destruction alerted the creature to a fatal flaw which would harry the Astartes' defense. Discovering a long-forgotten tunnel leading directly into the Arx Angelicum, the Ravagers of War had dislodged its once-sealed entrance, allowing for the Lictor to rally a band of Genestealers to accompany it into the heart of the fortress. as 10 waves passed above, deploying massive bioforms such as hive tyrants and tervagons into the fray. Though the Astartes held fast with their void shield intact, the Lictor directed its thralls to attack the Blood Angel's Hall of Sarcophagi. Dante alerted to the threat within, procuring a jet bike to hasten his intervention. Not even a relic of the White Scars would have hastened the ancient Astartes in time to prevent the loss of the neophytes within. The stalwart defense of over 30 battle brothers, unable to stem the slaughter. Grieving at the loss of the promising future of the chapter, slain within their state of rest, Dante would find no reprieve as the Lictor insurgent managed to infiltrate the Ark's shield generator systems, sacrificing its own body to overload its power source. Demanding his tech marines to shut down the void shield to prevent over 60% of the fortress's systems to fail, the Tyranids could no longer be prevented from overwhelming the second line of defenses, as 5 chapter masters gave their lives to hold the line for their retreating peers. As the Arks began to falter, the Flesh Terrors fared little better. The attempts to reclaim Angel's Fall, the site of Sanguinius' discovery, now a bloodbath of Xenos Vitae. Setting aside his misgivings of Centaur Jewel, Gabriel Seth upon Baal Primus fought his way to the Knights of Blood. The loss of the Angels Glorious, Burning Blood, and Sons of Jared, a sign that soon their own chapters would fall should fate not intervene. Resolving to return to the Basilica Sanguinorum in an attempt to die as true martyrs of Sanguinius, Seth and his men would not die as rabid beasts, and would not allow his chapter's last moments to be that of shameful ignominy. Baal Primus, under the protection of Captain Zedrenael, losing all contact with his peers, now scoured of all Imperial resistance, save for the Flesh Terrors and Knights of Blood, as a result of Kabanda's rampage. The Carmine Blades fought tooth and nail on Secundus to preserve their own astropathic relay to prevent a total collapse of communications. Within 3 weeks, the battle had turned from bad to worse, as the death incurred dwarfed any conflict of the modern era, save Arcadia. And as a twist of cruel fate, this world now burned as a result of Abaddon the Despoiler's malice. Baal stood on the precipice of defeat, yet as the Tyranids made ready their final attack, a rend in space tore open, the unfiltered essence of the Immaterium tearing a wound through the shadow in the warp, setting Baal's skies ablaze. The Tyranids screaming as hundreds of thousands perished. The hive mind, wounded by such a phenomena, reeled as its forces now unbound from its control fell into disarray.
Kabanda!
Jewel shouted.
Kabanda! Fight me!
The Angel's Bane did not hear him, so Jewel forced further passage through the 3-sided melee, weaving past a blood-crazed dreadnought, fighting a monstrosity composed entirely of screaming mouths. He felled a bloodletter, grappling with one of his warriors, shot down a hound with a frill of skin around its neck that leapt at him. The Tyranids he ignored unless they directly confronted him. Though the demons were legion, their hold on reality was tenuous. Every one killed saw 3 thrown into the warp, and many were but pale outlines, monsters sketched in hate on the canvas of reality.
Kabanda! Face me! In the name of the great angel, fight me!
At that, the greater demon did turn its apish face upon Jewel. Yellow teeth and red skin grinned horribly at him. Yellow teeth alike to Jewel's own, red skin like his own, and eyes that stared with the same intensity. A single crack of leathery wings sent Kabanda high over the fray. He landed bowed before Jewel in a billow of dust, his fist planted firmly in the ground. Growling, Kabanda rose up and spread his wings and weapons wide. He looked down upon the chapter master with ferocious mockery.
Here I am, Centaur Jewel. I will fight you, though you are no Primarch.
The demon took up a combat pose, axe ready to strike, whip snaking back and forth hypnotically. Air shimmered with heat around Kabanda. Steam rose from the beast's unnatural muscles, carrying the stench of rotting blood and old murder. Most dangerous were the waves of pure aggression, beating off the thing. There was no seduction in the demon's lure, no promise of pleasure or knowledge of the cessation of suffering as the other dark gods offered, but a raw, open invitation to violence and bloody abandon. It hammered against Centaur Jewel's mind, threatening to crack it open and send him screaming into madness. In the black promise of Kabanda, Jewel saw his worst excesses.
See how much you are alike to me,
Kabanda said, taking in Jewel's hideous visage, the muscles straining in his neck and the blood pounding, fit to burst his veins.
Truly, you are Khorne's creatures. Join me, and war by my side in an eternity of glorious slaughter. For you who thirst for blood, I offer oceans to slake your need.
Jewel fell to his knees with a groan. His heart ran so fast, something gave inside him. He spat a mouthful of his own blood onto the ground, where it hissed and bubbled.
Pathetic. You are nothing compared to your Genesire.
By his fury,
said Jul. He forced himself onto one knee.
See how he struggles,
Mocked Ka'Bandha.
By his fury I shall stand,
Said Jul quickly, fearing the knowledge of words would slip away from his mind and leave him dumb.
Ah, fury.
Said Ka'Bandha. He cracked his whip.
Fury is the power Khorne gives. Only by his gift do you stand, capable of facing me, when any other of your unworthy breed would have ripped his own skin off at the sight. Now turn around and take your rightful place at my side. All your line will be mine, eventually. Seek my favor, become the first.
Centaur Jul looked up into the demon's face and shook his head.
Very well, you cannot beat me.
Jul laughed, the blood pooling in his throat making it a gurgle.
We delay you, monster! Your power is not so great! Already your host unravels! Your time here is limited!
You will die!
Shouted Ka'Bandha with sudden rage.
I do not care!
Jul raised his sword.
Sanguinius banished you! I cannot! I come to give you my testament, demon!
He said, his voice strangled.
They call us monsters, rightfully so. But let it be known to you and your master that it is Sanguinius' fury that gives me strength, not bastard Khorne's!
Centaur Jul roared his last and charged at the Angel's Bane. Geron Lita, humble astropath prime of the Carmine Blades, braved the tides of the Immaterium to send a message to any who might hear their plight. His very body struggling to stave off possession by a fell entity to send but a simple phrase: save Baal. With only 157 of his own men left, the newly appointed First Blood of the Carmine Blades, Hajin, ended the suffering of his stalwart mortal aid. For little would this chapter master realize of the foe which his servant had foreseen in his last moments. The withdrawal of Gabriel Seth and Centaur Jul to their transports, interrupted by the Blood God's chosen champion, Ka'Bandha. Though the Tyranids had incurred a devastating blow, the arrival of chaos to the Baal system further compounded the woes of the Astartes. Fending off the endless hordes of Khorne as their forces dwindled rapidly, Centaur Jul demanded Seth withdraw his men, as his own damned chapter gave their lives to ensure their kindred's survival. Still clutching the reliquary of Ammit tightly to his chest, its presence saved Gabriel's kindred from falling to the Black Rage, their calm clarity allowing them to see reason in living to fight another day at the last stand of their Primox's monument to glory. The remainder of the Sanguinary Brotherhood, less fortunate. Across the Arx Angelicum, hundreds of Astartes fell to the call of their gene curse, now emboldened by the presence of the Warp. Centaur Jul, standing as a true martyr of Sanguinius in his final moments as his last remaining warriors fought the thralls of chaos, his blade would clash of that of the Bloodthirster, the jewel never intended as a means to slay the beast, but rather spit, defiant in its eye. Slain by the Blood God's chosen, as Seth and his men boarded their transport to reinforce the Arx Angelicum, as their vessel hurtled towards Baal Prime, Tyranid bioforms in the hundreds were swallowed into the roiling tides of the Warp. Commander Dante, seizing the opportunity to regroup within the Arx Angelicum as the hive mind faltered. Time itself stretched and constricted as the fighting, which lasted 6 days, protracted into months beyond the bounds of the Baal system. The last gasp of Tyranid forces, charging the fortress monastery in a desperate attempt to reclaim control. Dante rallied what men remained to enact their last stand against their foe, as the presence of the Immaterium abated. Opening the Tower of Amareo to spill forth its restrained Death Company warriors, Dante for the first time in years unshackled his fury. His killing arcs of the Ax Mortalis culling every foe in his path. The Sanguinor, appearing during the Sanguinary Brotherhood's final moments now that the Warp Storm had abated. Its outstretched hand pointed to an army of the dead, the Legion of the Damned, adding their might to the fray. The Swarm Lord in charge of the assault, confronting Dante with all but one of his Sanguinary guards slain. The Lord Commander fought the beast as the Sanguinor looked on, his impaling by its talons poised to end the reign of perhaps the most noblest Astartes to ever live. Yet Dante's duty was not done, and as he pointed his weapon, the Perdition pistol at the Swarm Lord's head, the Lord Commander disengaged its failsafes, rendering the monster's skull into little more than melted ruin. Falling into unconsciousness as his strength ebbed, Gabriel Seth now arrived to the battle, assumed command of the beleaguered Astartes forces, ordering all to withdraw to the safety of the Arx Angelicum to make their final stand. Retrieving the body of Dante, the Sanguinary Brotherhood ready to perish in the name of the Emperor. Yet the legacy of the great angel would not be sundered this day, as his own avenging brother arrived within system. Unleashing the amassed strength of the Indomitas Crusade to purge what remained of the Tyranids, though the waning of the Warp Storm had banished the forces of chaos, reminders of their savagery still adorned the moon of Baal Primus, clearly for Rabute Guilliman to see. Commander Dante treated for his wounds before being led to the Primarch, as firstborns beheld the arrival of unnumbered sons bearing their own crimson plating. Hope for their resurgence stirred within their hearts. Kneeling before Roboute Guilliman before being ordered by the Avenging Sun never to do so again, Baal Prime and Baal Secundus would be cleansed of the Leviathan's presence in the month to follow, as the Primaris Space Marines executed the will of the Lord of Ultramar. Baal Primus, little more than a barren husk following Kabanda's slaughter, Guilliman proclaimed Dante as the Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, supplying him with Primaris reinforcements to rebuild the chapters of the Blood. Gabriel Seth, returning the reliquary of Ammit to the care of the Blood Angels with the war concluded. His reservations of the Primaris Space Marines would regardless not stave off their assignment to his own beleaguered chapter, the wounds of war proving too costly to refuse any means of replenishment. Yet against all odds, Baal had survived the appetite of the Great Devourer, enormous piles of its bioformed skulls made by the armies of Khorne, regardless forming ziggurats warning of the bloodshed which would return in time. The Knights of Blood, honored for their sacrifice, yet never allowed to be refounded with Primaris Space Marines. The Mechanicum personnel of the Indomitas Crusade, organized to rebuild the Arx Angelicum, and bequeathed Primaris to what chapters had survived. For the legacy of Sanguinius persists to this day as among the finest of the Emperor's angels, for none, not even the Ultramarines and their progeny, have endured suffering commensurate with their glories.
I must soon leave Imperium Nihilus, said Guilliman. My final mission here was to reinforce you and your chapter successors, to shore up the defense of the Imperium in this segmentum, to... He let his words die in his mouth and began again. Dante, I am afraid I'm going to add to your burdens. The Blood Angels and their successors are needed more than ever. You need no longer allow men to see you as my brother, but I cannot let you retreat from the role of hero. I am going to name you Warden of Imperium Nihilus, commander of all Imperial forces north of the Great Rift. I must return over the Cicatrix Maledictum soon. Now I have found someone who will strive in my stead. I may. The situation here, though dire, is not as bad as I feared, while that in the Imperium remains parlous. I understand. I will do my best. Your best is more than I could wish for. Guilliman looked overhead. Baal Primus and Baal Secundus continued their slow waltz around Baal, as they always had. Only Baal Primus was now dead, and upon the southern hemisphere, the demonic rune of Kabanda's name laid in bright white bone. The skulls of millions of Tyranids, from void ships to vermin gatherers, had been stacked to create the sigil. Look at that, said Guilliman. The arrogance of the Neverborn remains as great as it ever was, but it is we who remain, and it is we who shall prevail. Dante, there is a lesser task I will set you. He lifted his hand up to encompass 3 worlds. These planets were hells. For generations we have recruited the strong over the weak, in the belief it makes our warriors better. I do not think this is so. Cruel men make cruel warriors, make cruel lords. We need to be better. We need to rise over the need for violence and recognize other human qualities in our recruits. Your chapter has understood this. If we do not, then we will fall prey to our worst excesses, the kind of thing that represents. He pointed at Kabanda's name. It has long been in your capability to transform these worlds. Baal Primus is dead, but you need not let your remaining people suffer unnecessarily. Will they fight any better for dwelling on a world that kills them? By sacrificing their children to the Emperor's service? They have earned a better life. Once you have torn that blasphemy down, raise up the population of Baal Secundus. Teach them what we are fighting for. A line must be drawn between what is good and what is evil, for if the great enemy comes with offers of power to a wretch, what reason does he have to refuse hell if he dwells in it already? Guilliman was tense. Dante had not expected that in the Lord of Ultramar. Guilliman was impatient to change things. He was angered by what he had found upon his rebirth, and he was not hiding it. You must find the strength to continue, Commander Dante. There are very few warriors like you in the galaxy anymore. I need every exemplar of heroism I can find. Please, do not disappoint me. I will not, my Lord Regent. Guilliman smiled at him again, and reached out to Dante. Dante extended his hand. The Primarch's fingers engulfed his hand, gauntlet and all. I know you will not. I am counting on you to prove me right. This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Baal's salvation was not won with martial skill alone. The timely intervention of both enemies and allies alike
ensured with sacrifices enacted in a timely manner. Though many will forget the deeds of Centaur Jewel or Geron Lita, their deeds proved pivotal in saving countless lives, despite their own being forfeit. We persist as a species, thanks to the sacrifices of many, the majority of which shall remain unheralded. For a brighter future is paved with the contributions of noble souls throughout all stages of our history. So remain grateful for the luxuries, opportunities, and rights you benefit, knowing that more must be achieved in the future. And should you sacrifice to achieve them, know that your deeds shall bring unfathomable joy and fulfillment to countless souls who you shall never meet.